Greetings humans, Unknown here, welcome back to another What If video. Today's What If is going to be part 4 to What If Deku or Midoriya had unlimited. Some of you might be asking, hey Unknown, why exactly is this What If coming out so late? It's because I had to re-record it. And the reason I had to re-record it is because I had fully recorded the first one, or I fully recorded this one, and I didn't like it. So here I am recording it again. Yeah. If you like the content, like the video, subscribe if you want to see more. If you do end up subscribing, hit the notification thing, the bell, so that you guys get uploaded you guys get notified when I upload. In the description, there is going to be a playlist for not only this What If, but the Discord, which I recommend joining. You guys can see concept arts of new What Ifs. You guys can also submit What If ideas, talk with the humans of this channel, the whole thing. What else? Yeah, nothing else really. With that being said, let's get into the recap. In the last part, we had gone over the events of the USJ, and went over the USJ. We then went over a little bit of Setsuna panicking about how Midoriya kind of went to the USJ as both the Vigilante and himself. So, and then that's when we have Midoriya handing a bag to Setsuna, stating that she needs to answer a few questions before she becomes a proper Vigilante. That's where we will be resuming the What If. So Setsuna, you want to become a hero, or rather a Vigilante. You need to answer a few of these questions first. Setsuna looks up at Midoriya confused and questions what exactly these questions are. And that's when Midoriya yet again speaks up. Well, to begin, the first question is, are you willing to keep it a secret? Because not only mine, but yours, and potentially any other people, all their, not only identities, but future careers could be in jeopardy, or could be jeopardized if, someone untrustworthy joins. Setsuna nods her head, stating that she does agree that she can keep the secret. Midoriya understands and begins speaking again. Alright, now for the second question. Are you willing, or are you aware of the danger this will put you in? I, for myself, I know I can handle, but are you aware that you will be going up against not only strong villains, but potentially strong pro-heroes as well? Setsuna thinks for a second and nods. Midoriya understands, and that's when Midoriya moves on to the third question. Alright, are you willing to get your hands dirty? Not killing anyone, but you realize that you will need to beat up people. And let's just say that it gets messy sometimes, as I'm sure you've noticed from the news. Setsuna thinks back to the times where on the news it states that pro-heroes had been beaten to bloody pulps, and this is where Setsuna hesitates, staring off into the distance, unsure of how to answer. Then she states that she would like to not fight people if possible, and would much rather sit in the back lines and not engage in the actual combat if that's what it meant. Midoriya nods and begins talking again. Alright, well, it seems like you passed all the questions. Go ahead and open the bag. Setsuna slowly opens the bag and pulls some things out. One of those things being a hoodie, somewhat similar to Midoriya's, and a mask, yet again similar to the one Midoriya wears, but it's different. It has different markings on it, a different line pattern, so to speak. But not only a different line pattern, but there's a little symbol engraved on the bottom where the cheek is, or the bottom portion of where the cheek is. It's a weird symbol that Setsuna can't really pin. She asks what the symbol stands for along with the pattern, and Midoriya just states that the symbol, that the pattern on the mask is meant to differentiate between the people, so they don't have to take the mask off to notice who it is, since there's a voice changer inside. But the symbol is to signify which portion of the cores you are, or which one of the little subgroups you belong to. For example, Setsuna's little marking represents reconnaissance, and she's the one that, is the eyes and ears to the operation. And depending on the distinct marking at the top, that signifies what role they play. Setsuna turns the mask upwards and looks at the top, noticing a different marking. Seeing that hers has a small image of a right hand on her, on the top of the forehead part. Setsuna questions what this means, and Midoriya states that due to it being a right hand, her role is of the right hand man, and she'll be leading the recon. Setsuna's confused, and Midoriya asks why, and that's when Setsuna states that how did Midoriya know that she wouldn't want to be in the actual, fighting portion. That's when Midoriya thinks about it, or that's when Midoriya thinks for a second and states that he knew because, with her experiences with her, when they were both vigilantes, she hadn't really engaged in the fighting and just sat back, doing mostly, just reconnaissance work and just staying back while Midoriya does most of the fighting. Setsuna chuckles at this, stating that he must have been able to pick that out a while ago and decided that he was going to try and recruit her at some point. And Midoriya states that of course he had, seeing as though she found out his identity so quickly. But as he says this, he begins sliding his mask on and flipping his hoodie over his head. Setsuna asks what he's doing, and that's when Midoriya points in a direction towards the ground and states, well, in that direction, someone had just gotten their purse stolen, so I gotta go. Immediately after saying this, Midoriya jumps off as Setsuna watches and lands on top of the villain, knocking him out while taking the purse and giving it back to the person who had gotten stolen. They thank Midoriya, and Midoriya just states that this is just what he does upon jumping away. Setsuna sees this as Midori is coming back and puts on the mask as well as putting the hoodie on. Upon coming back, Midori sees Setsuna in her vigilante uniform and says that it looks great on her. Setsuna blushes under her mask, and that's when and that's when they begin to do their patrols. Upon going on their patrols, they hear more and more about Stain through Midoriya and Setsuna's intel gathering, as well as beating up a few, villains. Midoriya continues thinking about, catching Stain because many people are getting killed that Midoriya believes are actually good heroes, but regardless of that fact, they still can't find Stain. He seems to be, well, everywhere and nowhere. This time passes, and Midori hopes Setsuna study while they do vigilante, or while they're on breaks, while doing their vigilante work. And since, they're being vigilantes, it kind of makes up for their quirk training. Yeah, some more time passes, and that's when school begins starting up again. And eventually, time happens where Midoriya is sitting in class when school starts up again, and Mina sits down in the seat next to him like she usually does, and begins speaking. So, Kazuya, you know that the Vigilante was here at the USJ, right? Midoriya nods his head, stating that he, knows that the Vigilante had been there, and that's when Mina begins speaking up. Well, upon getting a closer look at him, he really does look like you. Of course, the scar's eye color and hair color are different, but his body shape, his hair shape, pretty much everything about him is nearly exactly the same as you. Except for the attitude. Midori turns his head slightly and questions what Mina means by this, and that's when she states, well, the attitude is different. I'm not exactly sure how, but you feel like two completely different people, despite so many similarities. Midoriya shrugs, stating that he doesn't know why exactly they're so familiar, but it must be some kind of stroke of luck or unluckiness in Midoriya's case. Mina's reluctant, but ultimately agrees that this is probably some kind of coincidence. But that's when Aizawa comes through the door, or that's when the door begins opening and people question who exactly is going to be teaching their class, seeing as though Aizawa had been gravely hurt. But that's when Aizawa, covered in a large sum of bandages, walks through the door, surprising everyone. As Aizawa takes his place, he begins speaking. Just because that little event at the USJ had come to pass does not mean that we're completely out of, the woods yet. In terms of troubles, we still have our things to go. In other words, we have won the battle, but the war is still yet to be decided. Everyone begins fearing, questioning if they have another villain attack on their hands, but that's when that's when Aizawa immediately speaks up. The UA the UA Sports Festival is, well, soon, and you all need to be prepared so that you guys don't make fools of yourselves in front of pro heroes. Suddenly, the class is extremely relieved and begin cheering, but that's when one person begins speaking up. Hey, Aizawa-sensei? What? Why exactly are we doing this? Why are we going to run the event? Right after the villain attack? Don't you think it'd be dangerous? For, well, us to be in such a public area again? Especially if they figured out our plans for, well, a secret area known as the USJ. What makes them say, or wants to say that they won't attack us there? And what about the Vigilante, Deku? How do we know he's not going to be there and attack one of us? Maybe attack all of us. Upon hearing this, Midoriya tenses up, and Mina takes notice. That's when, what's it called? Aizawa begins speaking up again. Well, as for the Vigilante, I can say that I'm pretty sure he won't be attacking any of you. Because if he had wanted to, he would have done so at the USJ. And as for Midoriya, he releases his stressed nature, seeing Aizawa stand up for him, and lets out a light exhale, which Mina takes notice of again. Aizawa continues speaking, stating, and as for the UA Sports Festival, our defenses and security are going to be upped far more drastically than they had in previous years. Going to have many pro heroes there, not only to scope out but to protect the civilians and the students as well. Everyone understands, and that's around when class ends, after everyone begins talking for a while. Upon the bell ringing, Midoriya tries to leave the classroom, but that's when he sees a sea of students all staring at the 1A classroom and now at him. Midoriya is extremely confused as to why exactly this is, and that's when a few of them murmur, and one of them takes the lead. Huh, you 1A students think you're so much better than everyone else just because you're the number one, huh? Just because you did slightly better on some kind of robot-destroying exam, you think that you place above everyone else in this school. Midoriya gets irritated, but ultimately says nothing, trying to walk away. And you just won't say anything because you know it's true, don't you? But that's when Midoriya stops, immediately turning around towards the sea of people and begins shouting. Nobody said that they thought they were better than anyone else. Well, aside from maybe Bakugo. But besides that rare case, no one else. In fact, we hadn't even we haven't even began to think that we were better than us students in other classes. The only people to have brought up that idea are you. And seeing as though, we aren't the people standing outside of another class to torment them, and seeing as though we aren't doing that, it might be true what you say after all. Because I'm thinking that a real pro hero wouldn't be outside tormenting another person. But, hey, What do I know? As Midoriya says this, he walks away, walking to the support course. Or to the support course room. As Midoriya opens the door, something flies towards him, as Midoriya catches it, and places it down on the table. The person who is working runs over and asks Midoriya if he's alright, and he states that he is, and just wanted to know if the teacher's in. The girl states that the teacher's not in, but she's able to take any requests, seeing as though she's a part of the support course, extending her hand, stating that her name is stating that her name is Mei Hatsume. Midori extends his hand and shakes it, or unshakes her hand, stating that his name is Kazuya Yoru. Midori hands her a paper and asks if she would be able to make some of the things on the paper. And that's when she looks at it, stating that it should be relatively easy, but it won't be here for a few days. Midoriya understands and walks away, waving Mei Hatsume goodbye. Mei waves back as she begins to work on some of Midoriya's things along with some of her personal projects. Some time passes as Midoriya and Setsuna are doing their vigilante work, and Midoriya gets hit by a villain, slicing his hand pretty badly. Setsuna is worried about Midoriya's hand, but he states that it's really nothing to worry about, and that he had gotten much more damage done to him before, closing his hand, letting some of the blood flow out. People are loud. Okay. Closing his hand, letting some of the blood flow out, the cut being on his palm. Setsuna begins wrapping Midoriya's hand, and Midoriya chuckles slightly. Setsuna questions exactly as to why he's chuckling, and that's when Midoriya states that this is very familiar as what had happened before, with their first interaction going pretty much similarly. Setsuna is confused what Midori means, but that's when she remembers that the first time they had met, she was addressing Midoriya's wounds, ironically on the opposite side of where it had previously happened. Setsuna is, taken aback by this, almost having forgotten about how they had first met, and that's when she finishes addressing the wound, and Midoriya stands up, giving her a hug. Setsuna is confused as to why this is, but Midoriya states that it's just to say thanks. As they continue on their vigilante work, Midoriya doing less fighting, and less punches and more kicks, because, his hand is hurt. But unknown to Midoriya and Setsuna, someone had recorded Midoriya getting hurt, or getting sliced on his palm. And also having recorded Midoriya kicking instead of punching. And and that person uploads it to a little forum that deals with finding out who the vigilante kid is, and deals with just posting about the things that he's done. And one of the people on this thing two of the people are Mei Hatsume and Mina Ashida. They both see this, or they both see that the Vigilante kid gets hurt, or Deku gets hurt, and see his hand getting cut. After some time, that's. After some time, the video spreads across the internet, and around that time, Midoriya goes to pick up one of his gadgets, specifically a tool belt that he's going to use for his pro hero costume. Upon going, he goes to grab one of the items, but that's when he fully extends one of his hands, that being the hand that had gotten hurt, and Mei sees the large gash on it, immediately looking at it with wide eyes. She hands Midoriya the belt, but then goes close to his ear, questioning something. Hey, how'd you get that cut on your hand? Midoriya looks at it, shocked, and immediately puts his hand in his pocket, grabbing the belt with the other hand. Well, I got it while training. Mei looks at him, unsure of how to feel, and lets him go for the time being. A similar interaction happens with Mina, as she sees the scar on his hand, immediately asking what had happened, knowing that the Vigilante had gotten hurt in a similar place. She questions what exactly happened and how he got that wound. Midoriya again states that it was from training, and Mina holds the same disagreements, but ultimately accepts it. Midoriya sees this and decides to put on a glove so that less people draw attention to it. And since he'd forgotten about it, he can't just put makeup on it now. Some more time passes and the UA Sports Festival comes around. With everything happening as it did normal, with President Mike and Aizawa, more so President Mike, introducing all the classes and all the participants. But that's when President Mike's voice comes over the loudspeaker again. Now, can we please introduce the person who had scored the best on the UA entrance exam, Kazuya Yoru, for the traditional entrance speech. Midoriya looks around, shocked, stating that he hadn't known. But that's when he looks towards Ida being the class rep, and questions why exactly this is. Ida states that he had told Midoriya, but Midoriya had just not been listening. And that's when Midoriya becomes slightly upset hearing this, knowing that he could have known, or he should have known, but he had just not been paying attention. Midoriya goes down and immediately begins speaking up. Well, I don't know how to say this, but let's just say that I did not properly prepare for this speech. Regardless of that fact, for everyone here who's participating, good luck to you all, and everyone who's not, thank you for doing what you're doing so that this event is possible, as well as thank you to the staff for doing the same. Now, everyone here is here to do their best, so if you hold back at all, that's a sign of disrespect to everyone here. That being said, good luck. Cheers are heard, and Midoriya walks back to his normal place. exhaling sharply, waiting for the events to start. As the first event is rolled, it is exactly what it was in canon, being the race. For the race, everyone does. Midoriya looks up at the gigantic terminal area and notices that it's probably not going to be very easy to get through the door, especially if, well, these people are running through. And that's when Midoriya devises a plan to jump over. And as soon as the race starts, Midoriya does that exact thing, jumping over the crowd, immediately getting a head start of, well, everyone there. Midoriya uses his enhanced speed to run through everything, also running through the zero pointers, wanting to give other people chances to defeat them. But that's when he hears Todoroki behind him, immediately freezing one of the zero pointers as it falls down, with Todoroki not minding it at all. Midoriya notices that it might hurt some people and immediately turns around and catches the zero pointer before it falls. A few people thank Midoriya as Midoriya throws it to the side and immediately begins running with his super speed again. As this happens, Todoroki is slightly ahead of Midoriya, but with Midoriya gaining fast, he passes Todoroki over the zip lines, over the hopping area, seeing as though Midoriya uses his hopping, or he uses his super jump quirk to jump over all the obstacles, or jump over all the pad areas. And Midoriya continues going and continues running until he gets to the minefield area, in which he just uses his quirk to jump over it again, detonating none of the bombs, and just continues running until he gets first. Upon Midoriya getting first, people are excited about it, and everyone is, excited about this new kid who had displayed lots of physical enhanced abilities such as super speed and heightened jump abilities, as well as portraying super strength, seeing as though he had just caught a zero pointer. And despite going backwards in the race, he had also scored first. Todoroki is upset at this, seeing as though even after all that he had done, he still had only gotten second. And that's when Midoriya that's when the next event starts, and Midoriya is made aware of, since he got in first place, he now has a high bounty on his head, with his large point total. Or with his large point amount. But that's when... But that's when Midoriya goes... What's it called? Oh, that's when Midoriya is looking around for people to join him, but since everyone is, wanting to not pay attention to their points and just steal other ones, they don't really accept Midoriya's team offering. But that's when someone walks up behind him and taps him on the shoulder. Midoriya turns around and sees Setsuna. Midoriya asks who this is, And that's when Setsuna goes close to Midoriya's ear and begins speaking. You know, Misuka, that costume really isn't the best. You only really changed your eye color and your hair color, and covered up a little bit of the scars, but everything about you is still the same. Midoriya exhales a bit and states, okay, how long did you know for? Setsuna begins speaking up. About as soon as you finished the race, I saw you on the big screen, as well as all the things that you did, so kind of obvious. Midoriya accepts her on his team, and they go around looking for another person. That's when they find Uchiko Uraraka walking up to Kazuya, stating that she would like to join. She states that she wants to join, seeing as though Midori had helped her during the entrance exam, so now seems like a fitting time to help him as well. Midori nods, stating that her quirk can be useful, and that's when the third person runs up to Midoriya. Hey, you're Kazuya, right? Midori turns around and sees Hatsuma. Midori nods, stating that yes, he is Kazuya, and May questions if she would be able to join. Midori states that it should be no problem, but asks what exactly her quirk is. She states that her quirk is zoom and she can see things magnified, but that's not why she's here. She's here so that she's able to show off her inventions. Midori questions how she brought support items in, and she states that since she's in the support course, she's able to bring her gadgets without registration forms. Midori understands and waits for the actual trial to begin. Or waits for the actual battle to begin. As the thing starts, Midori asks Uraraka to touch all of them so that they would be able to be weightless so that they are able to run around a lot easier. Uraraka obliges, and that's when they all become weightless. Or lighter, anyway. As they're running around, Setsuna breaks apart pieces of her body and either flings them at people or uses them as a defensive barrier. And Mei Hatsune just runs around using her inventions as well, with Midori adding additional support whenever needed. Some time goes on as they're doing this, and that's when a similar situation happens in canon, in which Todoroki and his team is facing off against Midoriya's. During this, or as this happens, something similar things happen in canon, with Ida using his Recipro Burst. But as this happens, Setsuna fully displaces her body and starts swirling it around the group, and as Ida charges through, he looks at his hand, and that's when he sees it. A part of Setsuna, instead of the headband that he had tried to steal. Knowing that this happens, the group goes into panic, trying to go and grab Midoriya's headband, but ultimately it doesn't work, with Setsuna and Midoriya, along with Uraraka and Mei, either evade or hit away Team Todoroki's advances. All the teams who qualified in canon qualify in canon, or qualify here. It's just that Midoriya's team is still in first place instead of Todoroki's. And as the last event comes by, exactly what happens in canon, with it being the battles, And for simpleness sake, I'm going to say that all the battles are as they are in canon. It's just everywhere that there was Tokoyami, there's now going to be a Setsuna. And I'm going to go over the fights now. Leading off with Setsuna versus, or every other fight goes as canon, except for the ones with Setsuna and Midoriya. In this what if, Setsuna will now be going up against Momo Yaoyorozu, I think? Yeah, because that's who Tokoyami went up against. So, she goes up against Momo, and she moves her arms, or moves her arms, and immediately grabs onto Momo's back, like the back of her shirt, and yanks her out of point, or out of the arena, getting Momo out. So Setsuna moves on to the next round. As for Midoriya, Midoriya walks onto the stage, and that's when Midoriya's round against what's-his-face? Shinzo. Midoriya's fight against Shinzo goes as it does in canon, kind of, with Midoriya getting put under Shinzo's mind control, but Midoriya hopes and feels an extreme desire to not be put under this mind control anymore, and that's exactly when it happens. Midoriya is released from the mind control, and doesn't know how, but he is. But wanting to keep the gag on, Midoriya continues, but trips over his own foot to signify that he had been broken out from the mind control, knowing what Ojiro said earlier about him being snapped out of the mind control, or snapped out of his little daze, upon someone bumping into him. So Midoriya trips, and that's when Shinzo begins trying to frantically mind control him again. But Midoriya doesn't respond and just kicks Shinzo out of the arena. Shinzo is extremely upset, but that's when Midoriya extends his hand towards Shinzo, immediately pulling him up, going close to his ear, immediately whispering, "I have something to tell you afterwards. You piqued my interest. So, if you want to talk, meet with me after the UA Sports Festival." As Midoriya pats his back and walks away. Shinzo is confused as to what exactly this was, but keeps it in mind for now. Now we move over to Setsuna's second match against Bakugo, and, well, Setsuna holds anger against Bakugo, being one of Bakugo's bullying victims, but Bakugo ultimately doesn't really care, so they engage in the combat as they usually do. Setsuna begins fighting, but Bakugo is ultimately able to win, using a large explosion to blast Setsuna out of the arena. Midoriya runs over to where Setsuna is, and immediately picks her up, tending to her wounds, giving her first aid. Midoriya chuckles at this slightly, and Setsuna chuckles at this slightly, and Midoriya wonders what exactly this is, or why exactly she's chuckling. And that's when she states that this is the exact opposite of what usually happens. Midoriya laughing as well. Midoriya helps Setsuna stand and asks if she's alright, and she does, but needs a little assistance walking, seeing as though everything hurts. Midoriya obliges and allows her to, or gives her a seat. But that's when Midoriya is called down for his next match, as he gets ready and goes down. As Midoriya goes, he sees Todoroki. The fight against Todoroki goes somewhat similarly, with Midoriya fighting against his ice, being able to dodge and punch it away relatively easily, and Midoriya sees that Todoroki is freezing up. And that's when Midoriya screams out, "Hey, you realize that you're getting pretty icy there, right? What's the point in trying to beat me with half your quirk if I obviously was beating you with relative ease when you're using both sides? Who cares if it's your father's quirk too? Does he have your abilities? No, I didn't think so. So what exactly makes it the same? The fact that it's fire? My dad had a fire quirk. Does that mean I'm related to you? No, not remotely. So, my father had a fire quirk. Does that mean that I would refuse to use it if I had it? No. Who cares if what your father did just made you upset? What matters is that you win this tournament for your own sake, isn't it? So go ahead and try. Otherwise, this is gonna be boring." Upon hearing this, Todoroki explodes with his fire side and begins attacking Midoriya with fire, with Midoriya dodging all of them. Now that's what I'm talking about. Sadly, this is where it ends, as Midoriya runs by and punches Todoroki in the stomach, sending him flying out of the arena. As this happens, the next matches go, and that's when Midoriya fights Bakugo. Or rather, Kazuya fights Bakugo. Midoriya's going out, and that's when he sees Bakugo. Bakugo gets ready to fight, and so does Midoriya. And that's when Midoriya decides that he's not going to hold back, and immediately as it starts, he charges towards Bakugo, kneeing him in the gut and kicking him out of the arena, ending the battle as quickly as it had begun. With this happening, everyone is shocked, seeing as though he had some semblance of respect for everyone else, but with Bakugo, he just went all out. Midoriya brushes his shoulders off and makes a thumbs up towards Setsuna, which she shares the same thumbs up as they walk back. As the event ends, Midoriya scores number 1, Bakugo is in second, and Todoroki is in third. After some time, Midoriya and Setsuna are just walking around their thing, with Mei walking by as well, to congratulate Midoriya on his victory. Same thing with Mina. She congratulates Midoriya, and he thanks them both. But suddenly, that's when someone else shows up. Shinzo. Shinzo taps Midoriya on the back, and when Midoriya turns around, he sees Shinzo. Shinzo asks what exactly Midoriya had wanted to talk about, and that's when he looks over to Setsuna, whispering in her ears, saying that this is another person that Midoriya wanted to recruit. Setsuna whispers to Midoriya, stating that he's crazy if he thinks that he should recruit another person from UA, but he states that it's going to be fine, and saying as though Shinzo is a good person at heart, he thinks that he would agree to it. Setsuna states that this is probably not the best idea, but seeing as though Midori is the person who leads the operation, there's nothing really stopping him. As this happens, Midori grabs onto Shinzo's shoulder and tells him to walk with them as they walk out of earshot of everyone else. As Midori immediately begins speaking. So, Shinzo, what I wanted to ask you is, what are your views on that recent vigilante kid who popped up, Deku? As Midoriya says this, Shinzo thinks about it and states that he agrees with what he's doing, but ultimately sees the work as sloppy and realistically doesn't completely agree with his views, seeing as though he beats up villains and heroes just because of bad things that they've done, but ultimately states that it's probably the best way to fix the society that they're in, especially given his own circumstances. Midoriya understands, and that's when Midoriya states that he has a few questions to ask him, but at a later date, telling him to meet up with him outside of the same sort Setsuna that he had met up with Setsuna at. Shinzo agrees, and that's when Midoriya walks out a little bit, catching a conversation Ida has on his phone. Ida's situation goes as it does in canon, and Midoriya makes note of this for later, as himself and Setsuna, or as Midoriya and Setsuna walk around, just relaxing for a bit after the school festival. Today, Midoriya is making Shinzo's mask as a little bit of preparation, adding the voice changer when he gets a call on his phone. Midoriya picks it up and questions why Setsuna's calling him, and that's when Setsuna, clearly panicked, yells at Midoriya to turn on the TV and flip it to the news. Midoriya frantically fumbles for the remote as he turns it on and, flips over to the news. And as soon as he does, he sees the news headline, that being that the vigilante Deku had his identity revealed. Midori is confused as he continues watching, and the news reporter begins speaking. We are now here with supposedly one of the vigilante's previous classmates from middle and elementary school. Now, might we ask how exactly you knew about the vigilante's true identity? The kid then begins speaking up. Well, when I saw that Kazuya kid win at the sports festival, I had thought that he looked extremely familiar, so I decided to go and look into, my old school's yearbook. And when I did, I noticed a kid that I hadn't thought of in a long time, that being Izuku Midoriya. And when I looked at Midoriya, he bore striking resemblance to, the vigilante. And as I kept looking, more and more similarities popped up until I realized that it's probably him. The camera then pans back over to the news reporter as she begins speaking up. You heard it here first, folks. Supposedly, Izuku Midoriya is the vigilante. if anybody has any information about where Izuku Midori is at this given moment, it would be greatly requested if, well, information was given. Midori is immediately panicked as he begins hyperventilating, thinking that now he needs to conceal his identity. As he does this, Midoriya begins panicking even more and more as his hair begins changing, and so do his eyes. As they change to how it looks when he's, well, Kazuya. Midoriya looks at this confused and realizes that he developed the ability to change, well, his hair color and eye color as he's looking in the mirror, or as he looks over to a mirror. Midoriya tries changing it, both his eye color and hair color, and whatever he wants, he can change it to. Opting to change it to, Opting to change it to his appearance when he's Kazuya. Midoriya begins panicking while Setsuna does the same, and they both begin wondering and questioning what exactly they're going to do, seeing as though Midoriya had gotten his, well, identity put out in the public. Midoriya states that there's nothing they really can do, and just for them to lay low for the time being and take a break from their patrols. Setsuna understands, and that's when Midoriya states that he'll call her back later and hangs up. Setsuna is worried about Midoriya, and Midoriya is, well, also worried, seeing as though his identity got, well, exposed, but tries to calm himself down as he continues working on Shinzo's mask. A few days pass, and Midoriya contacts Shinzo and tells him to meet up outside of the store tells him to meet outside of the store that he had met with Setsuna. Midori invites Setsuna, but informs her to wear, well, her Vigilante uniform, wear her Vigilante uniform and wait for him at the rooftop. Setsuna understands and, well, does so. While Midori meets with Shinzo on the bottom part of where the store is. Midori, using his Kazuya outfit, well, his Kazuya hair anyway, walks up to Shinzo, who is waiting outside of the store with 2 bags. Midori states that he and Shinzo need to speak privately, and extends his hand. Shinzo takes it as Midoriya jumps up onto the rooftop of the store. Shinzo is a little shaky, seeing as though he had just gotten thrusted up to the roof, and that's when he begins questioning why they need to be so secretive. But that's when Midoriya hands Shinzo a bag and immediately tells Shinzo to keep it closed until Midoriya wants him to open it. Shinzo puts the bag at his side and questions what exactly Kazuya is talking about. But that's when Midoriya grabs a water bottle and drinks a little bit, putting it down, exhaling slightly. Well, let's hope that I can trust you. As Midoriya begins, changing his hair back to what it originally is, same thing with his eyes. As Midoriya does this, Shinzo is shocked and, a little terrified, seeing as though Midoriya is the Vigilante. Or, Kazuya is the Vigilante. Deku, also known as Izuku Midoriya. Shinzo steps back slightly, but that's when Midoriya tells Shinzo not to worry, seeing as though he's not going to attack him. Shinzo is still a little reluctant, but ultimately stands still, waiting for what Midoriya wants to say. Midoriya then begins to speak up. So, the reason that I had called you here is because I wanted to recruit you. Shinzo then looks at Midoriya, questioning what exactly he means, and that's when Midoriya speaks up again. Well, as I'm sure you know, I'm a vigilante. It's kind of obvious at this point, it's all over the world. But I called you here as Kazuya because I wanted to recruit you. I wanted you to be a vigilante with me and help me, or help with the cause. Shinzo immediately questions to Midoriya why he had chosen him, and that's when Midoriya speaks up again. Well, after the sports festival, you had told me that you somewhat agreed with the Vigilante's ideals, so I thought it would be a good idea recruiting you. Plus, with your quirk, it's extremely strong for, a lot of things dealing with vigilante business. And from what I'm aware, from my slight digging into the past, you had been bullied. People called your quirk villainous and said that you'd end up being a villain. So, I'm sure you know what it's like to, have a sucky life, seeing as though you'd been bullied for having a villainous quirk. And that's what I'm here to fix. This hero society, the world as a whole. I'm pretty sure you know what I do here as a vigilante. Beat up fakes and villains, as well as help those in need. So, do you want to join? Or rather, would you like to join? Shinzo thinks about this for a second and nods his head, stating that he might, but he's not entirely sure and needs some time to think about it. Midoriya acknowledges this fact and states that if he is going to join, he needs to answer a few questions first. And that's when Shinzo nods, stating that he'll answer the questions now and ultimately decide if he's going to join later. Midoriya understands and begins speaking. Alright, question number 1. Will you be able to keep a secret? More specifically, will you be able to keep this secret? Shinzo thinks for a second and nods, stating that he will be able to keep the secret. Midoriya understands and moves on to the next question. Alright. You do realize that if you do become a vigilante, you'll be, put into a large sum of danger. And if you are in a large sum of danger, you can get hurt. And to be quite honest, not only yourself, but anybody in this operation, and anyone you're associated with might become hurt as well. Are you aware of this risk? Shinzo nods again, stating that he understands. Midori then moves on to the final question. Alright? Last question. You do realize that you'll need to, let's say, engage in combat with many other villains and pro-heroes, many of which can be extremely strong. And knowing this fact that things can get a little messy. I do my best not to kill anyone, but as I'm sure you've seen on the news, most of the things I'm interacted with turn out messy, so to speak. Of course, no one actually dies and everyone's just beaten to pulps, but you know. And I need to know if you would be willing to do the same. Of course, well, such is difficult for me to express of how, well, you're going to need to do these things, but you will have to engage in combat at some point, whether it be of self-defense or out of just field operation. Shinzo nods, stating that he, well, had agreed that he would probably beat people up given the right circumstances in, or when they were talking at the sports festival. Midoriya nods his head, stating that he understands, and then begins speaking up once again. Well, Shinzo, you have my phone number. Respond to me when you finally have your answer on whether you would like to become a vigilante or not. I'll give you as much time as you need. But I do hope that you'll keep, well, my identity a secret. Seeing as though Izuku Midoriya had already been figured out, I can't allow Kazuya to be figured out as well. I do hope you can understand. Shinzo nods his head, stating that he does, and that's when Midoriya understands what Shinzo says. Well, understands Shinzo and begins walking away. Walking to the edge of the building, or the edge of the rooftop for the building, immediately speaking up. Well, as you know, you currently have a bag on you. When you get home, you're free to look at it, and if you do end up being a vigilante, you can recommend other, well, design features if you need, but for now, that will be your suit. Granted, if you do become a vigilante. With that being said, get over here. I'm going to take you down to the bottom of the building. As Midoriya says this, he changes his hair back and his eye color back as well. And Shinzo grabs onto Midoriya's shoulder as Midoriya jumps down to the building, or jumps down to the base of the building, immediately dropping Shinzo off as he walks away. Shinzo goes home and thinks about this as he opens the bag, and, well, he opens the bag and reaches in, pulling out a gray hoodie, similarly to how Deku's one looks, or Izuku Midoriya's one looks, as well as a mask that looks familiar, but ultimately is quite different. As for Midoriya's mask, it doesn't have any, well, mouth pattern, but this one does. As well as the signature red eyes, and a little symbol at the top. And along with the symbol, there's, well, an image on the side of his cheek. Shinzo questions what this is, but that's when he looks around the mask again and notices that there's a voice changer inside. Shinzo understands that that this is well that this must be what they use to communicate with each other, considering the fact that they don't want their identities being leaked out that easily. But Shinzo notices something different that he didn't notice about the Vigilante's mask. His has a little dial on the side. Shinzo turns it, but doesn't know why the dial's there, and why it has so many settings, but that's when Shinzo speaks through it, noticing that it sounds weird, and as he turns the dial, it changes. Both the pitch and how it sounds are altered depending on how the dials are set. Shinzo is extremely surprised at this, and that's when he continues fishing through the bag and comes across a little gauntlet. Shinzo looks at the gauntlet and is confused at it, but as he puts it on, he notices that it fits like a glove with a sleeve. He begins moving his hands around, and that's when he flings his hand down and little nails jut out of the fingertips of where the gloves are. Well, it being nearly fingerless gloves, but it shoots out tiny nails. Shinzo feels these and notices that they're made out of some kind of alloy that feels relatively strong and is quite secure. As Shinzo goes to cut something, that being paper, he glides his finger across the paper and notices that it cuts it relatively easily. Shinzo then begins moving his wrist to check how, flexible the actual glove is, and that's when he snaps his wrist, or not snaps his wrist, but he moves his wrist backwards quickly, and a little syringe pops out of where the wrist was. Shinzo looks at this and notices that it has a syringe in it, but the vial for it is completely empty. Upon moving his hand slightly back to its original position, though, the syringe goes back into the little glove area. Shinzo takes off his glove with relative ease after putting the nails away, and puts everything into a bag, putting it up as he gives Midoriya a call. Upon calling Midoriya picks up the phone. Hello? So, Shinzo, have you made your decision? Shinzo immediately states that he had, and that's when Midoriya states that he's willing to meet Shinzo at the same area that they had met. In a few days' time, maybe. Shinzo agrees, and before long, Midoriya as Kazuya meets up with Shinzo, and Shinzo has the bag slung over his back. But this time Midoriya is with someone hooded. Shinzo can't quite pin who it is, but ultimately he doesn't pay much mind to it. That's when Midoriya extends his hand, allowing for Shinzo to grab it, as Midoriya holds onto Shinzo's hand tightly, and immediately gestures towards the hooded figure to hold on to him as they grab Midoriya by the stomach. Midoriya jumps up to where they usually talk, and that's when the person lets go, backing up a little bit. Same thing with Shinzo. Shinzo immediately begins speaking, and that's when Shinzo immediately begins speaking. Well, I had thought about becoming a vigilante, and to be quite honest, it's a decision that I didn't think I'd be able to make so easily, but seeing as though you had already supplied me with the resources, and you put up, valid reasoning, and I quite like your cause, sure, I'll be your I will be a part of your vigilante group. Midoriya nods, and that's when Midoriya changes his hair back to his normal color, or to his normal hair color and eye color. Alright, well, before we go out on our first patrol, do you have any questions? Shinzo begins speaking and questions what were the details of the mask. Midoriya then gestures towards the top of Shinzo's mask and immediately begins speaking. Well, the top of your mask indicates your rank. The mouth portion of the mask indicates, well, who you are, so we don't have to be confused, assuming that we gather more people in this operation. I don't exactly want to be confused on who's who, so that's why the mouth is going to be different for each person. And as for the thing on your cheek, that determines which corps, or which one of the corps you belong to. As he says this, the person who is hooded, or the hooded figure, looks up, and Midoriya gestures towards their mask. As you can see, my partner here has, well, a spyglass, or not a spyglass, but a magnifying glass on their cheek, which means that they're a part of the reconnaissance group. Do you understand? Shinzo nods and immediately moves on to his next question. Alright, well, what about my little gloves? Midoriya thinks about what Shinzo means for a second, and that's when he realizes, oh, you had meant the gloves that I had made. Right, well, they're still a prototype, so don't worry too much if it breaks. I still have the general blueprints, but as I'm sure you figured out, you have two gloves in there. One of the gloves is, well, just the glove and a bit of the sleeve for support, and the other one is a full glove along with the sleeve going fully down to a little bit above your elbow. Shinzo nods and questions what exactly they're for, and Midoriya states that they're for self-defense, and begins going over all the things that the gloves entail. If you fling your hand down, it activates the claws. Doing the same again is going to retract the claws, as I'm sure you already know. Pushing your hand backwards, making a palm-like motion, is going to activate the syringe that I have built into one of your gloves. The syringe can be filled with anything, preferably sedatives, so you can knock someone out without actually having to engage in physical contact. As for the gloves themselves, they have knuckle braces that are, well, meant to pad your knuckles so you don't feel as much impact from a blow if you were to punch someone, allowing your fist not to take that much damage when you punch someone. But the knuckled areas are also padded, or not padded, but plated, so your punches will deal, well, far more damage to someone if you were to hit them. Of course, they can be spiked as well. If you have your fist and you fling your hand down, they become into spiked brass knuckles. The same thing is for both of them. Shinzo didn't know this and immediately tries it out, making the spiked brass knuckles. Shinzo immediately questions why the glove doesn't activate otherwise, and Midoriya just states that it's the way that it's programmed. And of course, he's probably going to get someone to design the gloves properly, but for the time being, he'll have to just work with the prototype. Shinzo is thankful and immediately questions again about the mask. Midoriya questions what he means, and that's when Shinzo gestures towards the dial. Midoriya immediately understands and begins talking about it. Oh, well, as you know, or Of course, you would know it's your quirk, but as you know, your quirk is brainwashing, and to activate it, you need to physically speak with someone and have them respond. And what's the most likely way to get someone to respond? Well, that's simple. Well, that's quite easy, actually. The most simple way for them to respond is using another person's voice. You see, if they're familiar with another person's voice, they're going to be far more likely to respond to that voice instead of yours. So, if you change your voice using that voice modifier that I had built into the mask, then, yeah. Of course, you have the ability to turn on and off the voice modifier, so you can either be left with your traditional voice change, or you can alter it depending on if you need to for intel gathering missions. Shinzo understands and immediately thanks Midoriya for all the things, and that's when Midoriya states that it's no problem, immediately sliding on his mask and flipping over his hoodie. Shinzo does the same and equips both of his gauntlets, or, well, the gloves, as Midoriya, Shinzo, and Setsuna. Shinzo, not knowing that Setsuna is the partner, begin their patrol. And that's where we'll be leaving off today's What If. Sorry that it came out late again, but I had to record it because I didn't like it, and I had to record this in segments, so that's why if it sounds choppy, that's why. And yeah. The next video that's going to be coming out is the 2/300 sub special, so look out for that. And yeah, with that being said, see ya.